Welcome back to the Man Cave Classroom. Today we're going to be talking about President Hoover, the Great Depression. We're going to check out some documents that definitely gives you some insight into how his presidency was going. And spoiler alert, his presidency was not going well. But let's look at how we even got there before we delve into some of these documents. So when we're looking at the causes of the Great Depression, we look at weak banks, overproduction, wages are not keeping up with prices, and of course, when the stock market crashes on Black Tuesday, this is kind of your event that historians go with that mark the beginning of the Great Depression. So, what does that mean? Well, when Hoover gets into office, the Depression starts. He was a guy who, was very highly qualified. This was the guy that was going to that helped to feed Europe after World War One. During World War One, he was the head of the Food Administration. He felt that food was going to win the war. So, if we're looking at a guy who is qualified to help feed people who are hungry, this would be the guy. Unfortunately for him, when he gets into the presidency, things don't go well for him. A lot of the public felt that Hoover was not doing well or not doing enough, I guess you could say, for the nation to get us out of the Depression. So when we look here at this cartoon talking about Hoover prosperity and how it's just around the corner, a lot of people felt at that time, and historians look back and they say, well, he wasn't doing much to end the Depression, which is going to bring us to our first document. This is a quote that was taken from the Grapes of Wrath, and I'll read it to you, and we'll get into some Hoovervilles. There was no order in the camp. Little gray tents, shacks, cars were scattered about at random. The first house was nondescript. The south wall was made of 3 sheets of rusty corrugated iron. The east wall, a square of moldy carpet, tacked between 2 boards. The north wall, a strip of roofing paper and a strip of tattered canvas. And the west wall, 6 pieces of gunny stacking. Over the square frame, on untrimmed willow limbs, grass had been piled, not thatched, but heaped in a low mound. Now, this is describing what this family encountered when they had to briefly stay in a Hooverville. Now, this political cartoon that we get into with Hoovervilles, I like this one. It's very colorful, but the one that most people see is this one. But when we're looking at the political cartoons dealing with Hoovervilles, which is what is being described, this political cartoon, I feel, doesn't always do a justice as to what life was like in Hoovervilles. It also doesn't do a justice to really give people an idea of the suffering here. So just to start here and look at this document, here we have some of these little shacks that were described in that reading. Of course, Hooverville. If you're a president and your name is referred to in this manner, this is not a very positive thing. Hooverville is very poor. It's very run down. And of course, when we're looking at Hoovervilles, this was something to also give you an idea how badly his presidency was going. And as well, they referred to it as Hoovervilles because they felt he wasn't doing enough to get the United States out of the Depression. We look here, we have these 2 gentlemen who are looking at this speech, probably talking about prosperity being around the corner. If we get a better look at them in this cartoon, the clothes seem to be a little bit run down. Of course, the shock and horror of what's going on. But when we talk about how this cartoon doesn't do much of a justice into giving you an idea of what the Hoovervilles are, let's take a good look at them. Now, of course, today when we look at Hoovervilles or we hear any type of town with ville at the end of it, we also like to think of Whoville. Ah, isn't that nice? Very, very pretty place, very joyful. So get this out of your head right away. These are what your Hoovervilles look like. A lot of the photographs coming from this time period, you had quite a few famous ones from Seattle, Washington, quite a few from also Central Park. But when we look at these Hoovervilles and you get an idea of the enormity of it, and this is just one section, if you look, a lot of these run down. It almost reminds me of forts I used to build as a kid in the backyard. You'd get scrap wood from some particular place and whatever would work. And bang, you have a roof over your head and you do have something that kind of protects you from the elements. But when I look at these photos here, all right, of course, living like this can't be easy, but there's a lot of things in here that I think you don't see. Hygiene, that's going to be a problem. The one thing I'm going to want to know about is running water, since hygiene and running water and proper plumbing are probably very closely linked. The other thing I'm going to see, the other thing I don't see here that I would imagine is going on, and this is very well documented, documented. You have people living here who are poor, who are desperate. So are there going to be fights? Are there going to be incidents of crime? I believe so, just looking at this and looking at the desperation that people were in. I'm trying to think of some other things that we may not see in here that's not going on. Oh, hunger, without a doubt. People are definitely probably going without food. Of course, you could see in the background, this is probably not the best place to live in. If you happen to live in a place that doesn't have a lot of noise and you're able to sleep at night, I would imagine at night, and God only knows what the beds look like in this particular situation. At night, when you're sleeping in that uncomfortable bed or maybe on that uncomfortable floor or whatever kind of mattress you have at this point, there's a lot of noise going on around here if you're looking at this in terms of the city being right nearby. And of course, you look at today and we talk about home security systems, a lot of people have security on their homes. I wonder what people were doing for locks. Very, very simple locks. I'm sure you'd have to worry about having people break into your home. And again, this one right next to the railroad tracks. I'm sure that was just wonderful to hear at 2 or 3 a.m. if the train just happened to be going by. Here's another interesting artifact that came across that does tell you a lot more here than I think is going on. This was not just something where people were living in here for a couple of days. If I'm looking here and it says Hooverville, U.S. Mail, it almost looks like, and in certain instances, this one was taken from Seattle, you had people who were living here for weeks, months. And the research I found out about this particular sign here was that this was a way for people to communicate with their friends or family, I should say, who are living in these Hoovervilles. Now, you got to remember, mail doesn't always move that fast. And that's not at the United States Postal Service, but you're talking about a couple of days. Who knows how longer it may have taken during the 1930s? But this is also giving you an idea of how long these people were there. This sign, of course, they had to kind of make up with some scrap wood they probably found from whatever house this used to be. So there's your breakdown of your Hoovervilles. Some other names or other Hooverisms, I guess you could say, that went along with this time period. You had an empty pocket turned inside out, which was considered a Hoover flag, again, indicating that you broke. Another thing that you see during this time period, going back to what you maybe saw in the Hoovervilles, of course, people need blankets. You also had people living on the streets. A newspaper that was used to keep you warm at night, they referred to as a Hoover blanket. Another one we didn't address there because I couldn't find a picture was Hoover leather, cardboard patch that covered a hole in a shoe. That also gives you an idea of how desperate people are in this situation. And if you're talking about Hoover leather, a hole in the shoe, and if you go back here, one of the things that you can't see, but it's know what's going on. If you were to ask, what are people dressed like, you would imagine they would be wearing the same outfit for days on end. How many outfits do you have? Shoes are very expensive. So the thing is that you're not going to be able to easily replace a shoe, thus the need for a cardboard patch to cover up a hole in your shoe. Moving forward, you can see that things are not going to look good for President Hoover. All right, President Roosevelt is going to then beat him in the next election. And to say that it's a landslide is an understatement. It was more of a first-round knockout, if you're familiar with boxing. But we don't have to dive too deeply into these documents. We'll do it another time. But if you look here, maybe a doctor. Oh, yes, a doctor. I'm sorry. It says Dr. Hoover's reducer right here. You have FDR, who's going to be a doctor here. Now, without delving too deeply into this, the one way that you can easily think about, who you would want as your doctor here is if you're looking at kids taking medicine here. Right over here, you're trying to take Hoover's medicine. Again, you're going to have to hold that nose and kind of force it down because taking medicine, particularly Robitussin, is disgusting. Whereas in this scenario here, looks very much like this child. Oh, okay, I'll take the medicine. It's okay. It's probably one of that nice flavored medicine, strawberry or blueberry, that's easier to take down. So this gives you kind of an idea, and we'll get into these documents at another time when we talk about more about the failures of Hoover's presidency and what FDR is going to do different from Hoover. So thank you very much for watching another edition of the Man Cave Classroom. Please be sure to follow us on Twitter at the Man Cave Classroom or on Instagram. Be sure to also subscribe to us on YouTube. We offer through social media resources additional teaching resources. We also uh, like to populate our social media accounts with additional articles. We find anything that's really cool or interesting in history. We will see you next time.